So I seem to be favouring this more informal kind of chatty style of video at the moment, which I hope you enjoy. Normal programming will resume shortly, but seeing as I'm kind of in the throes of this project and I've had difficulties with my health recently, it's meant I've had to take a bit of a different approach to video making, but that's okay, we adapt. So I'm here today to give you an update on my relaxed Regency project. So if you haven't seen that video, suggest you click the card now. Hopefully I'm pointing at it. That will take you to the video where I talk about why I started this project and my approach to it. So, but in short, essentially, from about the beginning of November last year, I became very unwell with my health and I really couldn't get out of bed, essentially. And so I decided that I still wanted to keep sewing, so I adapted and started on a hand sewing project, a historical practice project that I could work on from the comfort of my bed while I was recuperating. As you can probably tell, I'm now doing a bit better. So I'm up and about again, I'm getting dressed and putting makeup on, and I'm also back in the workroom sewing as opposed to being in bed, which means I can do things like use my sewing machine again, I can cut out again. So this project has developed into a partially hand sewn, partially machine sewn project, and I'm okay with that. You know, this is the whole thing. This is what I keep blabbering on about sewing with a disability, is you have to adapt. And if I want to continue with this project and continue to stay motivated and continue to have it be a source of joy in my life, I'm stopping hand sewing it and machine sewing it, because like the thought of just backstitching straight seams now just feels like a waste of energy that I could spend machine sewing it and getting the project finished. In my 2 months in bed, I did complete quite a lot of hand sewing historical practice. So almost all the undergarments, all the undergarments are going to be hand sewn. And I suppose if I get around to making a bonnet as well, that will be hand sewn because that's the nature of millinery. So the dress itself is going to be machine constructed, but hand trimmed. So I thought what I'd do today is do a bit of a review, fill you in, give you some nice close-ups of the work I've done and sort of explain my logic and thinking so that you have a grasp of where I am with this relaxed Regency project. Let's talk about the shift, or chemise, depending on country of origin and time period. Let's go with shift. So in March, when the pandemic hit, I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to need something to work on to get me through this lockdown period. And I decided I was going to make myself my first ever historical costume outfit. Yeah, that obviously didn't happen. And the reason was I designed and decided I should make an 18th century project before I realised that I don't really like the 18th century. It's just not a period of history that interests me. I'm a Victorianist. I don't really like the clothes. Pastel colours aren't my thing, you know, and sort of that sugary, frothy, frilly 18th century look just doesn't do it for me. So I was kind of like, why am I doing this? And I abandoned the project, and I didn't get any further than sewing the sleeves into this shift. So I cut it, I gored it, I did the hem, I think, I'm not sure. I did most of the construction, and then I put it in the UFO pile with the thought that maybe I'll come back to that 18th century project at some point. And so when I decided on the relaxed Regency project, I was actually like, oh, I've got a half-made 18th century shift, let's adapt that. So I just felled a few more seams. I hemmed the sleeves to be slightly shorter. You can see it's quite a bulky hem, and that's because I left the excess in so that if I do want to make it an 18th century shift at some point, I can just rehem the sleeves. And the one thing that I procrastinated for the longest time was cutting in the neckline, because I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I didn't know how low my Regency dress was going to be. I didn't know if I was making a high neck sort of Regency pelisse, so I left it. And then eventually what I decided to do was, based on the instructions in the Workwoman's Guide and also some extant examples that are in the collection at the National Trust, I just cut a flap. So it's kind of flops about. The Workwoman's Guide had some instructions that I couldn't decipher about working a buttonhole in the corner and then buttoning it to the stays straps, but I have no idea how, like, the logistics of that, like this, like buttoning it up here or buttoning it here, or like, yeah, I couldn't figure that out. And my stay straps are also quite off the shoulder, and so this wasn't wide enough to reach. The ones in the National Trust have cotton ties on, so I imagine you sort of tie it down like that over the bosom. I'm not sure. So I've just left it flapping around. I rolled hemmed the edges. But yeah, I quite like it. It's really great for filling in the sort of bust cups of the stays, which I'll show you a bit more later, and sort of helping to break up that line in the same way that a corset cover might, I suppose. Definitely adds a bit more sort of froth. And it's also just nice to have the sort of adjustability of, if I do wear something higher neck, I can fill that in, and if I want something lower neck and all that sort of thing. So I don't really have any more to say about that. It's a linen shift. It's pretty bog standard, but it was nice to have a head start on this project, so I could almost dive straight away into the stays, that's for sure. Okay, moving on to the stays. So I had originally intended to make the red threaded Regency stays, and I even made a 12. So I got to the point where I was altering the paper pattern, having done a mock-up, and I thought to myself, this isn't actually going to work for me in terms of accessibility in my body. Firstly, just getting the stays on was a nightmare. So the red threaded stays are back lacing. It's also spiral laced, obviously, at this period. It was just such a struggle to get them on, and I knew that that was not something that was going to be right for me. I was not going to wear them, essentially, if I couldn't get them on. So I knew then I wanted to change my stays, or change the way the stays fasten, essentially, so that I didn't have to wriggle through them over my head. The other thing that I was worried about was, the reality is, if ever I go to a costuming event, if they're allowed to happen at some point in the future, I'm probably going to have to go in a wheelchair, or if not a wheelchair, if I'm mobile enough that I'm going to a costuming event, I'm still going to have to spend quite a lot of the time sitting down. And yeah, the red threaded stays are quite long. They really cut in over the hip. The busk was really long, and you had to kind of sort of do that sitting on the edge of the chair like a Regency lady thing, which is fine, but I don't really have the muscle strength for that. Ooh, you're all right, love. So that was quite exhausting. And I thought to myself, yeah, this just isn't right for me. So I posted about this on Instagram, and I also asked some of our fellow costubers their thoughts and advice about Regency stays, and I got some responses. So the first response I got was from Katie from Latina Living History, and she wears Regency stays often. It's sort of her preferred era of costuming, and she shared with me some research she'd done on her blog about cutting your Regency stays higher in the back than at the front. And she had primary sources for this and extant examples. And so that was originally what I was going to do to my red threaded stays. I was going to eliminate the center front busk and just cut them higher at the back than they are at the front. But then one of my followers on Instagram, Ollie, thank you very much, Ollie, sent me a link to a blog post from a different blog, which is called Kleidung 1800. Excuse my German English there. So it's a blog in German and English, and it's about Kleidung, clothing, dress from the, early 19th century and the late 18th century, 1800, you get it. The lady who runs the blog, Sabine, she had done some research into a German pattern cutting manual for stays from the end of the 18th century, and as part of her research, she discovered in a museum in Utrecht in the Netherlands a pair of stays that looked like this. They were described as travelling stays or carriage stays, and because they were, firstly, cut longer in the front than they were in the back, but they also had this ingenious wraparound construction so that they fastened in the front, and the original fastens with a hook. I've got ties so that they're more adjustable. And she not only shared all the photographs that she had from the museum on her blog post, but she also made a gridded pattern for us all to enjoy, and she gave instructions for how to draft it to your size as well. So if you're in the market for a free Regency stays pattern, I absolutely recommend it. There will be a link in the description. So yeah, I adjusted it digitally and I printed it out, and I cut my mock-up, which became the lining of these stays, and it fit perfectly, and it was absolutely more suitable for everything that I needed. I could put it on myself without exhausting myself. It was short enough that I could sit down comfortably. It was a really great pattern. I'm so glad I found that. Thank you so much, Ollie. Thank you so much, Sabine. Thank you so much, Katie, for all your help with this. And I'm so pleased with the final stays. They're really comfortable, they're really adjustable, they absolutely give you that correct Regency silhouette. Yeah, the only issue I have is that this section here gapes over this shoulder of mine, and that is just to do with my uneven shoulder blades. I could put a dart in it, I suppose, but meh, who cares? Aesthetics. So in terms of construction, what did I do for these? Not only is this a free pattern, it's also really simple to construct. I put the gussets in, which is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult parts. Particularly, this is quite a heavy, I don't know what you'd call it. It's not quite a coutil, it's not a drill, it's like a corded cotton. It's quite heavy, sort of upholstery cotton or something, and it frayed a lot. So putting the gussets in was quite tricky, but I managed. And that was the first step. But then apart from that, it's just the 2 gussets, the busk pocket, and the side seams, and that's it. That's all the sewing. Of course, you have to do the binding and the ties and the eyelets and things, but it's a really simple construction, so absolutely perfect if you're just starting out. I would definitely recommend this. The only issue I found was particularly with the seam finishing. If I were making a corset or stays from a later period, I would flat fell my seams, or I would do like the double welt fell thing. I can't remember what it's called, but because this was such thick fabric, it didn't really work. So I ended up looking at extant examples of 18th century stays to see what they did with their construction, and quite often they just whipped, and I mean whipped as opposed to fell, with a straight stitch as opposed to an angled stitch, the seam allowance down. So that's what I did. Again, with the binding, I used shop-bought bias binding, cotton bias binding. Is it historically accurate? No. Do I care? No. It looks nice, it looks neat. It was a very efficient and effective way to bind these stays, and I like the way it looks. So I'm okay with that. This is just a cotton herringbone tape. The one thing that I did carry over from the red threaded stays was to have a cord gather up the top, which I wasn't sure was entirely necessary, but then actually with the amount of cleavage that you get with Regency stays, it was really nice to have the ability to sort of draw everything in, let's say. So yeah, I'm really pleased with the stays. This is my first corsetry project for myself, I think. This is my first successful corsetry project for myself, that's for sure. It's really exciting. I'm really pleased with them. They're really comfy, and I'm so grateful that I was able to find a solution to all my issues, really. I've got my busk, so the busk is just a straight busk, which I bought off Etsy from a seller called Silver Hill Historical. There'll be a link in the description, and she custom made this to the correct length for me, because obviously I'm not very tall and this is an unusual pattern. You tend to get sort of standard inch lengths for wooden busks like this, but she was kind enough to custom make one for me, which was lovely. So thank you very much, Lizzie, who runs the shop. So that just slides in. The only issue I have really is, you can probably see from the creases, the busk kind of rides up and I get wrinkles here. So I'm not entirely sure how to get it to stay crisp like that. If you know, let me know. So the petticoat, I knew I wanted to make a bodiced petticoat because I think they're more versatile for this Regency era, and also I wanted to do a bodice mock-up for the Laughing Moon pattern, because when I got it out and measured it, I was a bit like, this doesn't fit me. So I knew I needed to make a toile, a mock-up. So this is actually an old bed sheet. So I started by cutting out the bodice pieces to the size that the size guide said I should be for Laughing Moon, which is a 14, and I tacked it together just with running stitches by hand and tried it on over the other undergarments, and it was much too big in the bust, but it fit fine in the back. So I should explain, I'm a 36-inch bust, but I'm actually very narrow across the front and much more rounded in the back as a result of my scoliosis. So I often find that I need to have the back pieces much bigger proportionally than the front pieces. So as a result, when I fit it, I actually, I tacked it together and then I adjusted it to fit me, and then I compared it to the original pattern pieces. So the back pieces are still a 14. The front pieces were an 8, but the darts are from the smallest size, the 4. That gives you an impression of just how narrow I am across the front compared to the breadth of my back. So I'm pretty pleased with this pattern as a bodice starting point. I did have to alter it to fit, but then I have to alter everything to fit. So if you are more in proportion than me, it should be fine. Cut the size you expect. For the bodice, I used the Laughing Moon pattern, but the skirt is just a rectangle. I did contemplate like doing a gored skirt, but then that's more seams to backstitch, and I was kind of getting a bit done with the hand sewing at this point. So it's just a rectangle, and then I knife pleated it into the back. And of course I did, I think this is a mantua maker stitch, or maybe it's a run and fell stitch, I'm not sure, to do the centre back seam. So obviously I've got it left open quite a long way here. One of the things about this Laughing Moon pattern is there's no skirt placket, which is kind of weird in my opinion. Apparently it's historically accurate, so let's go with it, but it's annoying. I don't like it. So there are two options. Obviously it doesn't quite fit to my dress form, but you can cut the bodice back to overlap slightly and do buttons and buttonholes, or hooks and bars, or whatever takes your fancy, or you can have it meet edge to edge and tie with ribbons, which is apparently what a lot of Regency gowns do. They just have ribbon ties, they just meet edge to edge, and as a result the skirt just meets edge to edge, and you can kind of see I have turned and felt in edges, but the raw edges are kind of hidden in the pleats. So that's the idea, is that when it's closed like that, it's not going to gape open because you've got all the excess of the pleats. Yeah, however, I don't like that. So on my real thing, I think I will include a placket. You also then end up in a position where if you do want the bodice to overlap, the skirt doesn't. The skirts still finish at the centre black backline, and then you have the extension which just kind of flaps around, and then, yeah, I don't know, it's odd. So on my real skirt, I think I'll add a placket. Maybe that will make it less historically accurate, but to be honest, I'm going to be overlooking it and machine sewing it anyway, so I'm not really bothered about that. One thing I did, however, is I think I got my measurements wrong. I thought I'd cut something. This is the thing, I wasn't particularly with it, so don't know if basically I made the skirt much too long, like hilariously too long, like at least half a meter too long. I knew I wanted a corded hem and I knew I wanted tucks, and so because this was a flat bed sheet, I actually kind of cheated. I left in the machine hem that the sheet came with on one of the raw edges, and I used that as my hem, and I just ran a cord through it because I did not feel like backstitching a cord into the hem of this petticoat at that point. So I stitched in my tucks and I did my petticoat, and then I tried it on still, and it was just like, even with the tucks, it was much too long. So I actually had to rip out the petticoat bodice at the waist seam and then take it apart, chop however many centimeters it was off, 50 centimeters, and then re-pleat it, attach it to the bodice, which was kind of annoying, but it was definitely quicker than chopping off all the tucks I'd already sewn in and the corded hem and having to redo that. That was one of the things about doing the hand sewing that got me. It's so frustrating to have hand stitched something in, it's taken hours, and then it turns out you've done it wrong and you have to unpick it all and hand stitch it again. It's just like, really frustrating, and I don't really have the patience for that. So hence why I'm moving back to my machine. Generally, I'm really pleased with my petticoat. It fits nice and snugly over the stays, but it also fits without the stays, because that is also a historically accurate option for the Regency era. You don't actually need stays. Shh, don't tell anybody. Particularly if you're doing like the first few years of the 1800s. I'm glad I made this piece because I think it's actually going to be really versatile as a costuming piece. I'm also glad I made it adjustable with the ties because bodies change, and so having adjustable clothes is nice, you get more wear out of them. Oh, something I haven't talked about is the way I finished the armholes and the neck. I bought modern cotton bias binding and stitched it on because it was partly like a accessibility thing. It was just easier to buy cotton bias binding than make it. I know it's probably not entirely historically accurate. Would they have used cotton bias binding? Would they have cut binding on the bias? I don't know. But I didn't really know what else to do. I did consider hemming it, but it was so fiddly. So that was one of the last things I did on this project, and I don't regret it. Like I say, as my health improved, I lost patience for the hand sewing. I just wanted a bit more instant gratification. So the cotton bias binding was able to deliver that for me. So here we are in my completed set of hand-sewn Regency underthings. I'm really pleased with the way this project has gone so far. It was exactly what I needed at the end of last year. It was just a no pressure, chilled thing to experiment with something new, because one of the things I hadn't really considered, and I don't think I've talked about much here, is that I've never actually made myself historical costumes before, and this is the very first one, and I think it's a great place to start. I know a lot of people start with the 18th century, but to be honest, I think Regency is simpler. We also need less fabric, so it's cheaper. So if you're starting out, I would definitely go for a Regency project. I can't wait to get cracking on the rest of it. I'm halfway through making a chemisette. Hang on, I will show you these. A sneak peek or what? So I have made made the body of a chemisette. So this one is based on one of the patterns in Patterns of Fashion 1. It has a frilly collar and a ruffle. So I'm going to carry on working on the chemisette and then I'm going to start on the dress. So I think that's about it for this video. I'm really pleased with how this project's gone together so far. I did enjoy the historical construction, but I don't think I'll be doing any more of it. If you watched my Everything I Made in 2020 video, I talked a little bit about this towards the end. Something I learned about myself and how I like to sew in 2020 is that I'm not really bothered about the historical accurate construction. I am bothered about the historically accurate cut and textiles and things like that. But I'm a theatrical costume maker and I like doing what I do. I like doing my thing. So the dress that I'm making to go over all of this will be made with an overlocker and a sewing machine and all that good stuff. So those videos will be coming out at some point in the year. I'm not sure when. I'm hoping to make my more usual tutorial, sewing walkthrough videos that I make for those. So they take a bit longer, so I'm not sure when they'll be. So if you're interested in seeing those, make sure you subscribe because YouTube will then send you a notification when I put those out. Apart from that, I hope you enjoyed me blabbering on about my underwear for probably an hour. Thanks for watching. See you next time.